Welcome to the All Hoops podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman, joined as always by producer to the stars, co-host, and now married man, Chris Brito. Chris and I are going to discuss all the great NBA playoff first round series that have wrapped up, including our New York Knicks that have won in 6 games against the Philadelphia 76ers. Chris picked Knicks in 6. I also picked Knicks in 6. So we're going to do a little victory lap around finally getting one of our predictions right. But first of all, Chris, fun week. How are you?
Stevie, how could I be better after getting married and having the Knicks beat the Sixers? Um, that was a really grueling series, Steve. I think we all sort of thought that either the Knicks were gonna sweep them or the Knicks were gonna like take them in 7 games. Instead, we got them right in the middle. We got, listen, I don't care what anybody says. Embiid was mostly healthy. Like, I think anybody who wants to give me the argument that like Embiid wasn't at 100%, blah, 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 blah. Listen, he scored 50 points. He scored more than 30 points on game 6. He was good enough to play and win the series. And really like the score differential between both teams was really close. I think it was like 1 point. So all this to say that this was a very close series. This was extremely stressful. That being said, I'm glad the Knicks came out on top. And I think one of the more pivotal plays of this team and that shows its growth and evolution was that last year, in the final game between the series and the Knicks and the Heat, Brunson had the opportunity to pass the ball to Josh Hart to score a three to tie the game, I believe.
Yeah.
He didn't pass it, turned it over, and that was the end of the Knicks season. Nearly identical play. The Sixers went to double team Brunson. Brunson makes the pass to Josh Hart. Josh Hart makes a like nice little fake, but then shoots it, makes it in. Knicks are advancing. What a win. Steve, what are your main takeaways from this team from this particular series? And then we'll preview the next one against the
Yeah, I
Pacers.
think the first headline is the Knicks are really good, Chris. This is a really good Knicks team because you're facing a 7 seed Sixers that probably shouldn't have been a 7 seed. They're only there because of the injuries to Embiid throughout the year. They get the Sixers who had been what, like 8-0 with Embiid healthy in the last couple of weeks, and they played really well, Chris. This was probably the best defensively the Sixers have looked all year. And Bede had a couple of monster games, including a 50-pointer. You had a crazy maxi game to stay alive in game 5. And the Knicks took all those punches. Like you can make the case that the game 5 loss with up 6 points with 28 seconds to go was one of the worst losses in team history. And yet they came out guns ablazing 33-11 to start game 6 on the road when Philly made a real point of emphasis of saying, we got to make sure that Philly fans are in the building. We can't let us be taken over again by Knicks fans. They were loud, and the Knickses came in and said, no problem. We're here. And I think just being able to handle that means so much going forward.
The other thing too, at the same at this as you're saying it, like this team just has a mental toughness that's like different than I've seen any of the past Nick teams, and that really epitomizes what New York is all about. The As you said, and one of the details from last night too, the Knicks were also down 10 in the third quarter,
Yeah.
and it was looking bleak, man. It was
Yeah.
looking like I don't know what's gonna happen after this. But little by little, that team started chomping down the lead, and eventually they took the lead back again in the fourth quarter. And that fourth quarter was so much fun, super stressful,
Yeah.
but I would relive it again and again. I just thought, what a performance by Brunson, what a performance by the other guys. That starting lineup was crazy good, um, with virtually no help from the bench. Um, all this to say, I can't wait to see what this team has in store for the Pacers. The Pacers are a little bit of a different beast. While I
Yeah.
thought, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say that the Pacers are a different beast. They're much faster. They play with a, high octane pace, led by Halliburton. Um, they were able to take care of a Bucks team with, you know, two of their two injured stars. Dame came back for the last game. Giannis didn't play the whole series. Um, I feel really good about beating this Pacers team. My only concern is, will we be able to stop them? And how are we going to stop Halliburton? Because we didn't have any answer for Maxi until this last game. But I think that'll be the key to like really like putting a stop to the Pacers.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you there. I've been saying it for the last couple of weeks. Like this Pacer team, they were pretty vulnerable. It seems like Halliburton got hurt with a hamstring situation. I don't know when it was, but basically since mid-December or so, they've been a below average team. This has been a team that has been, you kind of ignore it when Halliburton had a big game or Turner, had a big game. But for the most part, this has been a pretty mediocre bunch. They bring in Siakam for help. But I like the Knicks here. This Pacer team just didn't play any defense. And even with no Giannis, even with no Lillard at times, they still got beat pretty bad in a couple of these games against this Bucks team that was ready to go to Cancun, right, Chris? So I really like the Knicks in this series. It's really important that they, stay focused because this is a very different series than the one they just played. This is not going to be the rock fight. First one to 105 wins. This is going to be a sprint. And I think the key to this series, aside from Brunson brilliance that we saw, is going to be Tom Thibodeau opening up this rotation and saying, okay, we're in it for the long haul here. We're trying not to just get past the Pacers. We're trying to get to Boston and give them a competitive series in the next round. And I think to do that, they're really going to need to make this an 8-man rotation at minimum. That means Alec Burks could be in play. That means Precious Achiuwa could be in play. But it just means they can't be going 7 guys trusting 6. They got to be going 8 deep.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point about expanding that bench. And I think Precious might end up being one of the more important players
Yeah.
in the series because while he has zero offense, I think he can probably defend all of those guys easier than maybe someone like Mitch could or Hardenstein could. Um,
Like the Pacers want to run. They want to get
right.
Turner and they want to get, Siakam and even Obi Toppin, who had a big game in game 6, out in space, running the floor, catching lobs. And they're going to need, at times they might need to go with 2 bigs because the Pacers are going to go with 2 bigs for a lot of these games. So pressure is going to be important.
It's gonna be really important. I think there are a lot of storylines here that are interesting. You have Obi playing his former team. You have the Knicks' old rivalry with the Pacers. You have OG playing against his old teammate in Siakam. Um, there are many reasons why we want this, but I think for the first time in a very long time, we have a feasible path to the next round. That being said, the Knicks need to take care of business. They need to respect their opponent with the Pacers. I think the Knicks actually did a great job in showing the Sixers the right amount of respect. They were like unlike like Paul Reed who started saying like, "Oh yeah, we prefer the Knicks because they were the weaker opponent."
Whoops.
Whoopsie. I think the Knicks are good about estimating.
Also, for the Paul Reed thing, he said they're the weaker opponent to Boston. That's probably true. Like it shouldn't be this like, how dare you say this? It's not like he said they're the weakest opponent of every opponent. He said about them versus Boston. Like Boston won 64 games. Like it's not a crazy thing to say. It's just one of
I
those
thought it
things
was in reference to the
you can say.
Bucks.
I thought it was in reference to should people were saying the Sixers should have lost that play-in game to Miami so they could be the 8 seed.
Okay, that does check out actually.
I think
Yeah.
that's what it was about, but it
Yeah,
was a
yeah, you're
ridiculous
right. You're
nonsense
right.
in the
That
game.
checks out.
Yeah.
That
But
checks
yeah,
out.
I think this series is going to be very interesting. Obviously, Jalen Brunson's playing out of his mind. Um, But if he needs any extra motivation, he's facing Rick Carlisle, the coach who benched him more or less 2 years ago in the playoffs in that game 7 against the Clippers 2 years ago that the Mavs lost. He wound up playing only like 10 minutes in that game. And so now he's a superstar and he's going to try to eliminate that coach. So it's going to be a great series. I'm going to take the Knicks in 5 here. I think the Pacers probably get one of them at home, but it's going to be a very fast-paced series, in my opinion. I think the Knicks are going to show some offense. And, at times it looked like where are they going to find some offense? I think they're going to have some, easier times getting buckets in transition. And for that reason, I'm taking the Knicks in 5.
Yeah, and I think we need to see more from I feel like everyone's like really playing their best. Um, but I want to see more of Dante DiVincenzo like driving to the rim. He stepped up in such a big way in game 6. I want to see more of that in this series. I think we're gonna need him. We're gonna need people to score. And to your point, we're gonna need Burks. Like we're gonna need Burks, whether we like it or not. Um, that being said, I'm excited. I like our chances. And after like that offense that I've been seeing from OG Anunoby, I like his game a lot more than I knew I did. He has a nice jumper. He gets to the
OG
rim.
does a little bit of everything. He was really important in this series for sure, and I think he'll be really important going forward. The Pacers, I talked about how they haven't really been the same since mid-December. I meant mid-January. Mid-January is right around the time they had a big winning streak that ended. Since then, 44 games. They went 24 and 20, and they
Sure.
averaged 120 points a game. They gave up 117 and a half. So this has been a team that just goes track meets. Ready, set, let's run. And the Knicks, it's going to be pretty hard for them to slow the Pacers down. And so, in my opinion, they're going to have, be running and gunning too. So I think these games are going to be very unpredictable in terms of who is going to be hot and who's going to be scoring. But if Brunson's averaging 30 plus a game, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they stop Halliburton from doing the same.
Yeah.
Um, but I like their chances.
I love our chances. I loved our chances even if we were facing the Bucks. That being said, I feel good about this group and I can't wait to see what happens next.
All right, Chris, let's go around the league here. There were some surprises. We got a lot of our predictions right, but I think the biggest surprise for me was the Timberwolves Suns series, where Anthony Edwards just went right at KD on both ends of the floor. He looked like a top 5 player in the NBA, if not better than that. The quotes about how Durant was his favorite player growing up, and he's got to take him down now. We're great. Everyone was eating that up. More and more Michael Jordan comps are coming. You heard Mike Conley say it the other day. I was just surprised this was a sweep, Chris. I thought the Suns would show some fight. They really didn't. They didn't really, there was no vintage Durant game. There was no great Booker game. Bradley Beal was really just okay. What kind of was the biggest surprise to you in the first round, Chris?
I think it's hard to argue that. I think it's hard to argue that, the Suns couldn't even take a single game
Yeah.
from Timberwolves. Um, I think what surprised me in general was how effective Gobert was against them.
Yeah.
Because as one of our keys in our previous podcast for the Suns was that they were going to expose Gobert because he always
They
gets
go bare off the
in the
floor. Yeah.
playoffs. Um, but in fact, Gobert ended up being like, apart from Anthony Edwards, the most influential player for the Timberwolves. So all this to say, I don't know if Gobert is going to replicate those numbers, but I think this matchup really favors the Wolves. I mean, they actually have the pieces who could, at the very least, slow down someone like Jokic. Um, and as you know, a lot of those Wolves defenders are so like switchy. Oh, they can guard anybody. And so,
Right. So that's going to be the real test here. It's the defensive player of the year kind of guy in Gobert versus the MVP and Joker. I don't think Gobert is going to be able to slow Joker down much. I think Joker's going to do his 28, 8-8 kind of thing. I'm taking Denver in 6 here, but if they're able to slow Joker down, it kind of shows that like this Nuggets team might be human after all. They might be able to be stopped. But this is going to be a great series, I think.
My thing, the one thing that doesn't allow me to fully like go with the Nuggets is that Jamal Murray is still a little bit hurt. And I feel like on some level, yeah, sure, everyone's a little bit hurt in the playoffs. Um, that being said, I kind of like the Wolves.
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna
think this
go.
is going to be the best series, the most much watched series of any of them besides our Knicks Pacers, of course.
I think it'll be 7 games this one. I think
Who wins it?
I think it's gonna be the Nuggets. The only reason why I think the Nuggets are gonna win, I think it's because they have a little more experience. And I think that matters in the playoffs. You can get
Yeah,
away you can get away with that against a broken team like the Suns. You can't get away with that against the Nuggets.
we'll have to see how much the Minnesota Timberwolves have learned from their first round loss to the Nuggets last year. That's going to be very interesting to tell. Chris, any other series really jump out to you going into the second round?
Um, I would have loved to see the Heat play the Celtics with Jimmy. I kind of went. I know the Heat stole a game from them. I'm disappointed it didn't go further. That way, like the Celtics would have had a little bit more of a challenge. But that's not really OKC sweeping the Pelicans. Also, like the Pelicans couldn't take a single game.
Yeah.
Uh, as
I
a
was a
re-
little disappointed in Brandon Ingram there. I kind of thought he would be able to carry them to a game or two and put up some good numbers, and he and CJ McCollum just couldn't get in a rhythm.
yeah, and we predicted the Pacers were going to beat the Bucks, so it wasn't really a surprise. But there was still a little bit of like, maybe these guys might get it together. But this will be the third time in the last since the Bucks won the championship that he hasn't reached the Eastern Conference Finals. So that's crazy.
Yeah. All right, Chris, we got a lot of great playoff games coming up. Let's get to our final thoughts. Chris, the Bucks were eliminating game 6, but it got ugly, and it got ugly because of Patrick Beverley here. He wound up throwing a basketball at a fan not once, but twice. And once you could say, "Hey, I just lost it in that 1 second." He deliberately did it 2 times, and then after the game, he has a reporter asking him some questions. He's in a big media scrum. There's a bunch of guys there, and he tells a female reporter, "Are you subscribed to my pod? If you're not, I can't talk to you." And basically tells her to get out of the way. And coming off of a very despicable act caught on camera, for him to do that afterwards is just terrible. And we've seen a lot of teams put up with a lot of nonsense for star players. Chris, this is not a star player. This is not even a great defensive player anymore. He's kind of at the end of his career. And I think this should be the end. He is just not worth these annoyances anymore. And for him to do this be the last memory of this Bucks season, the Bucks should be ashamed of themselves for bringing him in.
Well, I don't think the Bucks should feel ashamed of themselves. I
They should be
think
they should feel embarrassed by what he did.
they
Shame may be the
definitely
wrong word. They should feel embarrassed.
yes, and I think that's the word. I think it was super embarrassing to have someone like Beverly do what he did. I think they're gonna move on from him in the offseason. Um, I think the what sealed the coffin for him was his lack of how he couldn't stop Halliburton in that game 5 or game 4 loss. Like he should have stopped him. But anyway,
He's
just
a guy who's been on
it
six
doesn't.
teams in
But
the
to be
last
honest with
three
you, it doesn't
years.
like this doesn't really matter that much. Like they're gonna move on from Pat Bev. Pat Bev
I,
is.
I know they'll move on from him. I'm saying I don't think any other team should give him a chance. I think this is
I
the
don't think
end.
so. I think you're probably right, and I think he apparently did something similar in the bubble. So this man, like, all right, I think it's over. Like
Yeah. I mean, he'll be 36 in July. He had a long career. I mean, as a guy who was a
Yeah,
second round pick who no one really saw this coming. He had a very strong career for a person picked 42nd overall. But I
yeah,
think just the headaches that he's been causing the last couple of years, it's just not worth it anymore.
yeah, and I think the Bucks won't just move on from Pat Bev. I think they move on from Chris Middleton too.
Well, Chris Middleton signed his big extension last summer. So it would have to be a team saying we're willing to take Chris Middleton coming off an injury plagued year at 30 million plus a year. I don't see that happening. I think the Bucks are basically going to run it back with
Mhm.
a very old roster, hoping everyone's healthy. And
Yeah,
they'll
but
preach, getting everyone together, getting everyone healthy, a full year under Doc Rivers' system, and they'll preach that. And I think their window to be a title contender, it's not shut, but it doesn't look as open as it did a year ago.
especially because those you have the Knicks and the Celtics now.
And Philly, I think Philly, if Philly winded up getting that 6th seed, I think they would have beaten this Bucks team too.
Yeah.
They're in the second round, but it's tough
Anyway,
playing the Knicks, I guess. Chris, last thing, the Lakers on Friday fired Darvin Ham. And Chris, look, I mean, there was a lot of, concern over his rotations and his play calling, but at the same time, you have two superstars and a lot of inconsistent role players.
yeah.
They wound up facing the best team, in my opinion, in basketball 2 years in a row, and they got bounced. Like, to me, this is not Darvin Ham's fault.
I think the problem lies in the roster construction.
Yeah.
And I think the Lakers need LeBron, and right now LeBron mostly needs the Lakers. Um, I think the Lakers probably offer him, if he doesn't want a discount, I think they offer him the best path for a championship. Unless he's willing to go to Philly for a discount. I don't know. But
Right.
um, yeah, it's definitely not Darvin Ham's fault, but he didn't help himself with any currency by the way. It seemed like he never really had a hold on this roster from a leader standpoint. So
How many LeBron teams can say the coach had a handle on leadership in the group? It's so hard to coach LeBron.
I
This
would
is
just
what the
say
sixth full-time coach that was fired under LeBron's watch here. Like it's probably not going to even be the last either.
I would say the only coaches who were able to like really get LeBron were Ty Lue and Eric Spoelstra. And I think it ends there.
And when he was in Miami, he went to Pat Riley and said, fire Spoelstra. And the only reason, Spoelstra was able to keep his job is because Pat Riley was confident he wouldn't lose his. And, that's the way it goes sometimes. But you either lose your job or you win the championship. And there's really no in between when it comes to LeBron coaches and his 20 plus years in the NBA.
Yeah.
But that's going to do it for us. Chris, anything else you have before we wrap up the show?
No, excited to see what the next round looks like.
All right, that's going to do it for us. Thank you for listening and watching. And we'll be back next week to talk more NBA action, including Knicks and the Pacers.